When we go into the northwest Amazon of Colombia, an area the size of France, we suddenly find something very different going on. Here are people living in the Blackwater upreaches, as isolated in the Amazon as you can go. But these are incredibly sophisticated people. Massive monumental architecture, these huge malokas, which are both models of the universe, but also they echo the universal moloka that hovers over the entire landscape and is rooted in the sacred places. The entire society is strictly hierarchical, with initiation notions based on knowledge, complex solar calendars, incredible cycles of notions of landscape and spirit, and in fact exchange systems that facilitated peace, not war, including something we call linguistic exogamy. You must marry someone who speaks a different language. And so in any one longhouse, you have as many as 6 and 7 languages spoken, but you never hear a child practicing a distinct tongue. They simply wait, watch, and listen, and when they begin to speak. And what's fascinating about this is that because of progressive policies of the Colombian government, there has been a renaissance in the northwest Amazon that is simply astonishing. And when I returned there in last January to make a film for the National Geographic, I was there with Stephen Hugh Jones, former head of anthropology at Cambridge, who had made a film in the BBC Disappearing World strand of the late 60s. And at that time, it seemed like all these cultures were on their way out, as it were. And to his great delight, he said, the only thing that have disappeared in 30 years are the bloody missionaries. And what has happened now is a renaissance that is simply astonishing. And what we've come to understand in these great ritual gestures, these great ceremonies, is that the mythology of the people is in fact a land management plan that maintains the Amazon as it is meant to be. We now know that 20% of the Amazon was in fact anthropomorphic. In other words, it was created by human beings. We now know that there are vast islands of blackwater soil throughout the Amazon where people cultivated plants with great intensity. And in the ceremonies that are going on to this day, 250 men in full ritual regalia take ayahuasca and not only become the ancestors, as ancestors they then travel back to the sacred sites. And these are photographs that I took in the month of January, and I came through customs on the eve of Obama's inauguration, still painted in ritual regalia, and I went from taking ayahuasca, 24 hours later I was in black tie at the Green Ball, and it seemed appropriate, you know, for a new dawn in America. But what is so incredible is to think about that, and this is the theme I'll be talking all morning about. These are not disappearing worlds. These are dynamic living peoples that, if given a chance, contribute to the global dialogue around the new campfire, which is the internet. These are the sacred places to which they return literally and metaphysically in trance. Now, this idea of looking in landscape for character is something that's always inspired me. I was very fortunate as a young student to fall into the orbit of Richard Evans Schultes, the man who sparked the psychedelic era with his discovery of the magic mushrooms in Mexico in 1938. He, in 1941, having solved the mystery of Ololuiki and Tehuantacatl, he took a semester's leave of absence from Harvard and disappeared in the northwest Amazon for 12 years, where he remained alone, traveling down unknown rivers, living amongst unknown peoples, mostly the people of the Anaconda, all the time entranced and enchanted by the wonder of the neotropical rainforest. But he was an odd choice to become a 60s icon because his politics were wildly conservative. He didn't vote for the Republican Party. He professed not to believe in the American Revolution. And he always voted for Her Majesty, Queen Elizabeth II. He was such an Anglophile, and he used to have a bucket of peyote buttons outside of his door available as an optional laboratory experiment for his students. He used to blow blowguns in class, but he was such an Anglophile that he once said, a colleague once said of him, the only way Schultes could go native would be to go to London. And I had no idea about this history when at the age of 18 I knocked on his door and I said, "Sir, I've saved up money in a logging camp. I'm from British," that's it, that's all it took. That adjective, I'm from British Columbia, I want to go to the Amazon as you did and collect plants. Now in Canada, where I was from, a professor would have grilled me about my credentials, what courses I had taken, where did my money come from, you know. And why I love this country so much is because in this critical moment, this great professor looked up across a mound of plant specimens through his antiquated bifocals and said very simply, "Well, son, when do you want to go?" And 2 weeks later, I was in the Amazon, and before going, I went back to see him because Prince Philip had called him Father Amazon, and my mother in Victoria was a little nervous about me going off at the age of 18 for 2 years in the Amazon. And so I had to get some pointers for it, and he had 3 vital pieces of advice. He said, don't bother with leather boots because all the snakes bite at the neck. And then he advised me to wear a pith helmet because he had never lost his bifocals in 12 years. And then the third piece of advice, which certainly didn't placate my mum in Victoria, was that I should not come back without trying ayahuasca. But then he did say I should look up his man in Colombia, and he had done the impossible for his protege, a wonderful young botanist called Timothy Plowman. He had secured the dream academic grant of the 1970s, $250,000 to study a plant known to the Inca as a divine leaf of immortality, coca, the notorious source of cocaine. And it was an extraordinary assignment because even though the efforts to eradicate the traditional fields had been underway for 50 years, long before there was an illicit market for cocaine or any kind of cocaine problem, and those efforts incidentally never had anything to do with the pharmacology of cocaine and everything to do with the cultural identity of those who revered the plant. But we knew nothing about coca. We didn't know how many species yielded the drug, even though the drug itself had revolutionized ophthalmology by allowing for the painless removal of cataracts. We didn't know its point of origin. We had never done a nutritional study of the plant, even though it was something that was consumed every day by millions of South American Indians. And so on this journey inspired by the great professor and infused at all times with his spirit, Timothy and I spent 2 years in South America seeking an understanding of the sacred leaf. And one of the things we did that horrified our backers at the US government is that we did do the first nutritional study of coca, and we showed that yes, it had a small amount of cocaine hydrochloride in it, roughly analogous to the amount of caffeine in a coffee bean. But it also was chock full of vitamins. It had more calcium in it than any plant ever studied by science, which made it perfect for a diet that lacked a dairy product, particularly for young mothers. It also had enzymes which enhanced the body's ability to digest carbohydrate at high elevation, which made it perfect for the potato diet of the Andes. So in one elegant assay, we put into stark profile these draconian efforts that are still underway to eradicate the traditional fields of a plant that had been used with no evidence of toxicity, let alone addiction, for over 4,000 years. And in the course of that work with coca, I became fascinated by notions of sacred geography. What did it mean for a child to be raised with a fundamental belief, for example, that a mountain would direct his destiny? How did that change his perspective to landscape and the environment, as opposed to, say, a kid from Canada or the US raised to believe that a mountain was simply a pile of rock ready to be mined? And for years, I heard about an event that occurred in the valley of Chinchero, in the environs of Cusco, the site of the summer palace of Topa Inca Yupanqui, the second of the great Incan rulers. And once each year, the fastest young boy in every hamlet is given the honor of becoming a woman. And he becomes a huaylaca, a transvestite. And he dons the traje of his sister or of his mother, and he must lead all able-bodied men on a run. But it's not your ordinary run. You start off at 11,500 feet, you run 2,000 feet down to the sacred Apu, Antiquilca, you run soaring up to the top of the mountain, only to run down the far side toward the sacred valley, only to climb to another high pass, almost 18 hours of this over the course of a very long day. The entire route is marked by holy mounds of earth where the huaylaca must spin to bring the vortex of the feminine to the mountaintop, where Pachamama is blessed with libations of alcohol and coca leaves itself. And the metaphor is so clear. You enter the mountain as an individual, but through sacrifice, the giving of your exhaustion, the making of the sacred, you emerge as a collective that once again has, through ritual gesture, redefined your sense of belonging on the planet. And I can promise you that at the age of 48, I was the only outsider ever to participate in the movimiento, the only one to complete it, and I only was able to do so by chewing more coca leaves in one day than anyone in 4,000 years of the plant's history. But actually what got me through it is I had baptized a little boy when he was an infant in the beautiful colonial church there, and he had grown to a man who was working as a tailor in Cusco, and when he heard that his padrino, who had put him, I paid for everything, was about to be stupid enough to run this race, he and 2 of his lads came out and they stuck to me like limpets. They weren't about to let anything happen to the cash cow.